Lena had no idea how she had gotten herself into this situation. One moment, she was sipping her lukewarm coffee at the tiny cafe where she worked, and the next, her best friend Mia was begging her to do the unthinkable, go on a fake date with a man she had never met. "Please, Lena? I owe him a favor and I can't go, just one dinner. He needs a date for some business event," Mia pleaded, clasping her hands together dramatically. Lena sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Mia, I don't even know the guy. What if he's awful?" Mia shook her head. "He's not. Well, he's intense, but he's a gentleman and he's rich." "Like crazy rich," Lena raised an eyebrow. "Oh great, a rich guy who needs a fake date. That's not suspicious at all," Mia groaned. "Lena, he's my boss's cousin. He's important. Just be charming, have dinner, and leave. He even said he'd pay you for your time." Lena narrowed her eyes. "I don't need his money." "Then do it as a favor to me," Lena exhaled. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "Fine, but if he's obnoxious, I'm leaving early," Mia beamed. "You won't regret it." Lena was already regretting it. That evening, she arrived at the high-end restaurant Mia had texted her the address for. The moment she stepped inside, she felt wildly out of place. The chandeliers sparkled, the air smelled of expensive wine, and the waiters moved with polished elegance. She swallowed hard. Then she saw him. He was seated at a table in the center of the room, wearing a crisp black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his sharp jawline looked like it had been sculpted by the gods themselves. But it was his eyes that caught her off guard, intense, piercing, like he could see right through her. Lena hesitated. This man didn't look like someone who needed a fake date. As if sensing her presence, he turned his head, locking eyes with her. A slow, almost intrigued expression crossed his face before he stood and walked toward her. "You must be Lena," he said, his voice deep and smooth. She forced a smile. "And you must be Quentin Blackwood." Something about the way he said his name made her stomach flip. He extended a hand and she shook it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. "You're late," he said, though there was no real bite to his tone. Lena blinked. Sorry, I didn't know there was a strict schedule." Quentin studied her for a moment before nodding toward the table. "Join me." She hesitated but sat down, smoothing her dress nervously. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring her a glass of wine without even asking. "I take it Mia didn't tell you much about me," Quentin said, watching her carefully. "Not really," Lena admitted. "Just that you needed a date for some business event." Quentin's lips twitched. "I suppose that's one way to put it." Lena frowned. "And what's the other way?" He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Let's just say my family is relentless when it comes to my personal life. They think I should be settling down and I'd rather not deal with their matchmaking efforts." Lena raised an eyebrow. "So you hired a fake date to get them off your back?" "Something like that." His gaze didn't waver. "And you, why did you agree?" Lena shrugged. "Mia begged me, and I figured, why not? It's just one dinner." Quentin's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. One dinner. The conversation moved smoothly after that. To Lena's surprise, Quentin wasn't as arrogant as she had expected. He was sharp, direct, but not unpleasant. He listened when she spoke, his full attention on her in a way that felt strangely disarming. Then, just as she was starting to relax, a voice interrupted them. "Quentin, darling." Lena turned to see an older woman approaching, elegant, dressed in designer from head to toe, her eyes sharp with curiosity. Quentin stood, his expression unreadable. "Mother," Lena stiffened. This was his mother, and from the way she was eyeing Lena, she wasn't thrilled. "And who is this?" his mother asked, her gaze sweeping over Lena like she was inspecting a piece of art. Quentin's hand suddenly rested on Lena's. "This is Lena," he said smoothly. "My date." Lena's stomach flipped, his mother's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't aware you were seeing anyone." Quentin's fingers tightened slightly around Lena's. It's new. Lena forced a polite smile, though she had no idea what was happening. His mother gave a slow, assessing nod before turning back to Quentin. We'll talk later. And then, as quickly as she had arrived, she left. Lena exhaled. That was intense. Quentin didn't let go of her hand. She'll ask questions, that's why I need you to keep up this act for a little longer. Lena's eyes widened. Wait, what? I need you to be my girlfriend. Just for a little while, Lena blinked. Quentin, I agreed to one dinner, not a full-on fake relationship. I'll make it worth your while. His voice was low, serious. Lena hesitated. This was insane, and yet something about the way he looked at her made her pulse race. Think about it, he said, his mouth curving into the faintest hint of a smile. You might even enjoy it. Lena had a feeling she was in over her head. Lena stared at Quentin, her mind racing. His request was unexpected, borderline absurd, yet the calm intensity in his gaze made it clear he wasn't joking. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. Quentin, I don't think you understand. I agreed to one dinner, a whole fake relationship. That's a lot more complicated. He leaned forward slightly, his expression composed but unwavering. I understand perfectly, but I also know you're considering it. Lena frowned, caught off guard by his confidence. And what makes you think that? Because you're curious, he replied simply. About me, about this. She hated that he was right. Quentin Blackwood wasn't just some rich businessman looking for a convenient solution. There was something else, something beneath the surface, and despite herself, she wanted to know what it was. Still, logic fought against intrigue. Your family will see through it. People like them, they know when something's fake. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. That's exactly why I need someone who doesn't fit into their mold, someone unexpected. Lena's stomach tightened. Because I'm not from your world. Exactly. There was no mockery in his tone, just simple truth. She glanced away, her thoughts tangling. This wasn't just about fooling his family. There was something deeper at play, something he wasn't saying. When she looked back at him, she asked the question that had been forming in the back of her mind since the moment he made his offer. And what do you get out of this, really? Quentin didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. Control. Lena's eyebrows lifted slightly. My family has their expectations, he continued. They want me to marry the right person, someone from their world. If I pretend to be involved with someone they wouldn't choose, it buys me time. It keeps them from interfering. She processed his words carefully. So I'm a distraction. His lips pressed together briefly. You're more than that. The way he said it sent an unexpected shiver through her. Lena let out a slow breath, her mind still trying to grasp how she had gone from a simple favor to standing at the edge of something far more complex. And what happens when this is over? Quentin didn't hesitate. We go our separate ways. It was the obvious answer, yet it didn't sit as comfortably as it should have. She looked at him again, this man who had walked into her life so suddenly, shifting everything in an instant. He was composed, confident, and undeniably magnetic. But there was something else, something guarded beneath the surface. Against every ounce of reason, she heard herself say, Fine, but I have conditions. Quentin's eyes darkened slightly, as if he had expected nothing less. I'm listening. I won't lie about who I am or pretend to be something I'm not, she said firmly. And if at any point this becomes too much, I walk away, no questions asked. He considered her words, then gave a single nod. Agreed. Lena wasn't sure if she had just made the smartest or most reckless decision of her life. The next morning, Lena found herself standing in front of a sleek black car parked outside her apartment. The driver, a man with a professional demeanor, opened the door for her without a word. This was real now. She slid into the back seat, exhaling as the car pulled away from the curb. She had barely processed the whirlwind of the previous night, and now she was being driven to meet Quentin at his office. The city blurred past as she tried to piece together what she had gotten herself into. When the car finally stopped in front of a towering glass building, her heart thudded. Blackwood Enterprises. She stepped out, tilting her head back to take in the sheer height of it. The people moving in and out of the entrance wore sharp suits and carried an air of importance. A man in a tailored suit approached her before she could even think about turning around. "Miss Carter." His voice was polished, professional. She nodded hesitantly. "Right this way." She followed him inside, stepping into a world that felt far too polished for someone like her. The lobby was marble and glass, the kind of place that made it clear only the most powerful belonged here. As she was led to a private elevator, her nerves prickled. The doors slid open to reveal Quentin, standing with his hands in his pockets, his gaze locking onto hers the moment she stepped inside. "You came," he said smoothly. "Figured I should see what I've signed up for," she replied, keeping her voice even. The doors closed and they were alone. Quentin's eyes traced over her carefully. "You're nervous." Lena lifted her chin slightly. "I'm aware this is your world, not mine." His expression didn't change, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. "That won't be a problem." The elevator doors opened to his office, a space that was both sleek and commanding, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Lena stepped inside, taking it all in. Quentin moved to his desk, watching her closely. "You're about to meet my family." Her stomach tightened. "That soon?" "They're impatient," he said simply, "and I don't like delays." Lena exhaled. "Great." He studied her reactions before walking toward her. "You'll be fine." She gave him a look. "That's easy for you to say. You've had years to deal with them." Quentin's lips quirked slightly. "You'll keep up." There was something in his voice, an unshakable confidence in her that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Before she could respond, the office doors swung open. "Quentin." A man stepped inside, older with the same sharp features, his presence commanding. Lena knew instantly this was someone important. Beside her, Quentin's posture remained unchanged. "Uncle." The older man's gaze flicked to Lena, assessing her in a way that made her spine stiffen. "So this is the woman," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with something else. Lena didn't flinch. "Lena Carter." The man's lips pressed together slightly. "Interesting choice." Quentin's hand brushed against her, subtle, barely there, but enough to remind her that they were in this together. Lena didn't know what she had just stepped into, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Lena had never felt so scrutinized in her life. Quentin's uncle, Charles Blackwood, watched her with the kind of quiet calculation that made her hyper-aware of every breath she took. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable, yet there was no mistaking the curiosity in his gaze. Quentin remained composed, his posture effortlessly assured as he gestured for them to sit. Lena followed his lead, settling into the leather chair across from Charles, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Charles leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the polished surface of Quentin's desk. "You've certainly surprised us, Quentin." Quentin's tone remained steady. "I didn't think my personal life required a family vote." Charles's lips twitched, though not in amusement. "It doesn't. But when a Blackwood makes an unexpected decision, people notice." His attention turned fully to Lena. "And you, Miss Carter, are very unexpected." Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "I imagine I am." A flicker of something, perhaps intrigue, passed through his eyes before he nodded slightly. "Tell me, how did you two meet?" Lena had anticipated this question. Quentin had briefed her in the car, ensuring they had a believable story. But now that the moment was here, she didn't want to sound rehearsed. She allowed herself a small smile, keeping her tone natural. "An accident, really. We met at a cafe. He was in a hurry. I spilled coffee on him." Not exactly a meet-cute, but it got his attention. Quentin's expression didn't change, but his fingers traced the edge of his watch in a slow, absent movement. She was refreshingly honest, he added smoothly. Unlike most people in my world. Charles observed them carefully, as if weighing their words against an unseen scale of truth. And yet, despite that honesty, you never mentioned her. Quentin's gaze didn't waver. Because I wasn't interested in putting her under the microscope. Lena resisted the urge to shift in her seat. The Blackwoods were clearly used to reading between the lines, searching for inconsistencies. If they sensed anything off, this whole arrangement would collapse before it even began. Charles studied them for another long moment before finally exhaling. You've always been difficult. Quentin's lips pressed together briefly. I prefer independent. A low hum of amusement came from Charles, though Lena wasn't sure if it was genuine or merely polite. He pushed back his chair, standing with effortless authority. I'll let your mother know I met her. His gaze flickered toward Lena again. I imagine you'll be at the charity gala this weekend. Lena's pulse stuttered. Quentin hadn't mentioned anything about a gala. Quentin, however, didn't miss a beat. We wouldn't miss it. Charles nodded once, then strode out of the office without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, Lena let out a slow breath. That was intense. Quentin leaned against the desk, his fingers tapping an absent rhythm. That was expected. She gave him a pointed look. Would have been nice to know about this gala before it was casually thrown into conversation. His expression remained unreadable. Would you have said no? Lena scoffed. That's not the point. Quentin tilted his head slightly as though assessing her reaction. You handled yourself well. She crossed her arms. That's not an answer. For a moment he said nothing, then finally pushed off the desk, moving toward the window. The gala is an annual event. It's high profile, full of people looking for leverage. It's also the perfect opportunity for my family to put you under even closer scrutiny. Lena exhaled slowly. So basically, I need to be flawless. He turned back to face her. You just need to be yourself. She narrowed her eyes slightly. That's easy for you to say. You were born into this world. His jaw tightened just a fraction, a rare crack in his usual composure. And you think that makes it easier? Lena hesitated. There was something sharp in his tone, something that hinted at a much deeper struggle than he let on. Before she could respond, Quentin moved toward his desk, picking up his phone. I'll have something sent over for you to wear. She lifted a brow. I can pick my own dress. His gaze flickered toward her, unreadable. I have no doubt. But this isn't just about looking beautiful. You need to wear something that makes a statement. Lena's fingers curled slightly. And what statement is that? Quentin held her gaze, his voice softer now. That you belong. Something about the way he said it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She swallowed, forcing herself to keep her expression neutral. Fine, but don't expect me to play the perfect socialite. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I wouldn't dream of it. The night of the gala arrived faster than Lena was prepared for. She stood in front of a floor-length mirror, staring at the gown that had been delivered earlier that day. It was deep emerald, the fabric smooth and weighty, hugging her figure in ways that made her feel both powerful and exposed. The neckline was elegant, the back dipped just enough to be daring but not scandalous. She had never worn anything like it. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Quentin stood there, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His presence filled the space instantly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a slow, deliberate manner. For the first time since meeting him, Lena saw something flicker in his gaze, something unreadable, something almost dangerous. You look. He paused as if searching for the right word. Lena lifted a brow. Like someone who doesn't belong. His jaw tightened. Like someone who's about to make my family question everything they think they know. Her pulse jumped. Quentin offered his arm. "Shall we?" Lena hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand through his. As they stepped into the waiting car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was about to change everything. Lena had been to fancy events before weddings, the occasional fundraiser where she helped serve drinks, but nothing prepared her for this. The Blackwood Charity Gala was held in a grand ballroom, the kind of place that didn't just glitter, it radiated power. The chandeliers were impossibly large, casting a golden glow over the extravagance of it all. The air hummed with the low murmur of conversation, laughter that carried an edge of calculation, and the quiet clinking of champagne glasses. As Quentin led her inside, the weight of countless gazes fell on her. She could feel them assessing, whispering, wondering. She wasn't one of them, and they knew it, but Quentin didn't hesitate. His hand remained firm against the small of her back, guiding her with the kind of confidence that made it clear he didn't care what anyone thought. A woman in an ice blue gown approached, her features sharp with curiosity. Her eyes flickered between Quentin and Lena before she offered a polite, practiced smile. "So this is the woman causing all the family discussions." Lena barely had time to process the words before Quentin spoke, his voice even. "Lena, this is my cousin Evelyn." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "Brave of you to come tonight." Lena tilted her head slightly. "Should I be afraid?" Evelyn's lips curved just slightly. "Not afraid, just aware." Quentin's fingers pressed lightly against Lena's back, a silent reassurance. "Lena can handle herself." Evelyn held Lena's gaze for a moment longer before nodding slightly. "Then I suppose we'll all look forward to getting to know her better." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind an unspoken warning. Lena exhaled, keeping her voice low. "Is your entire family trained in psychological warfare?" Quentin's expression remained unreadable, but his tone held a trace of amusement. "More or less." Before she could respond, another figure approached, a man older than Quentin, his features bearing the same sharp Blackwood elegance. His suit was pristine, his posture effortless, but his gaze held something colder. "Quentin," the man greeted, his voice smooth but edged with something unspoken. His gaze barely flickered toward Lena before returning to Quentin. "Our mother is waiting to speak with you." Quentin's posture didn't shift, but Lena felt the subtle tension in the way he held himself. "I'll find her in a moment." The man's eyes darkened slightly. "She won't wait forever." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the sea of wealth and influence. Lena exhaled slowly. "That was your brother, wasn't it?" Quentin nodded once. "Nathaniel." She studied him, noting the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "You don't get along." His gaze remained fixed on something in the distance. "We have different views on, expectations." Before she could push further, another voice interrupted them. "Quentin, darling." Lena turned, and there she was, his mother. She was striking, her presence commanding in a way that needed no effort. Her gown was deep burgundy, her jewelry tasteful yet unmistakably expensive. But it was her eyes that held the most power, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. Lena straightened instinctively. Quentin's mother studied her for a moment before speaking. "You've certainly surprised us all." Lena met her gaze without hesitation. "I imagine that doesn't happen often." Something flickered in the woman's expression, interest, perhaps. "Walk with me," she said, her tone leaving little room for refusal. Lena glanced at Quentin, but he gave a small nod, a silent trust, so she followed. They moved through the ballroom, past glittering figures dressed in wealth, until they reached a quieter area near the grand windows that overlooked the city skyline. Quentin's mother turned to face her fully. "You're not what we expected." Lena kept her voice steady. "I gathered that." A pause. "Then do you love my son?" The question landed like a weight between them. Lena could have lied. Could have given a carefully crafted answer, something that would fit neatly into whatever expectations this woman had. But instead, she said the only thing that felt true. I don't think love is something that can be measured by expectations. Quentin's mother studied her for a long moment before exhaling slowly. You're different. Lena lifted her chin slightly. Is that a problem? A rare, almost imperceptible smile touched the woman's lips. Not necessarily. Before Lena could respond, Quentin appeared beside her, his presence grounding. His mother's gaze flickered between them before she inclined her head slightly. I imagine we'll be seeing more of you, Miss Carter. Lena met her gaze evenly. I imagine you will. As Quentin led her back toward the center of the room, she caught the faintest trace of something in his expression: approval, perhaps even admiration. She exhaled. That went better than expected. Quentin's voice was low, certain. You impressed her. Lena glanced up at him. Is that difficult? His eyes held hers. Extremely. Something in the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken. Before she could overanalyze it, music filled the air and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Quentin extended a hand toward her. Dance with me. She hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. As he pulled her into his arms, the world around them faded slightly. The music swelled, the hum of conversation dulled, and for the first time since stepping into this world, Lena felt something unexpected, like she belonged. Quentin's hand rested lightly against her waist, his movements effortlessly smooth as he led her across the floor. She tilted her head slightly. You're good at this. His lips curved just slightly. I had to be. Lena studied him, the way his expression remained composed even as his grip tightened ever so slightly around her. Do you ever get tired of the performance? His gaze darkened slightly. More than you know. Something inside her ached at the quiet honesty in his words. Without thinking, she squeezed his hand gently. A silent understanding. Quentin's hold on her tightened in response. And in that moment, amidst the glittering crowd and the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides, something shifted between them. Something real. Lena felt the lingering warmth of Quentin's hand even after the dance ended. The music shifted to something slower, but they didn't move to keep dancing. Instead, Quentin's gaze remained steady on her, filled with something deeper than the polished charm he presented to the world. A quiet tension settled between them, one that had nothing to do with the performance they had agreed to maintain. Before either of them could speak, a new presence interrupted. A woman, effortlessly poised in a crimson gown, approached with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she belonged in this world. Her blonde hair was swept into a sleek arrangement, not a single strand out of place. But it was the way she looked at Quentin, possessive, expectant, that sent a cold realization through Lena's chest. She knew him, and not in the way the rest of these people did. Lena took a half step back instinctively, but Quentin's fingers brushed against hers, anchoring her in place. The woman's gaze flickered over to Lena, assessing, before settling back on Quentin. She addressed him with familiarity. Lena didn't miss the way Quentin's expression hardened ever so slightly. Whatever history existed between them, it wasn't a pleasant one. The woman barely spared Lena another glance before continuing, her words laced with something almost amused. Quentin's response was measured, cool, but there was an unmistakable sharpness beneath his tone. Lena didn't need the full details to piece together the situation. This woman had been part of Quentin's past, perhaps in a way that once mattered. But now there was distance, restraint, and something even colder than disinterest. Still, Lena wasn't blind to the way people around them began to take notice. The whispers, the subtle glances. The woman lingered for a moment longer before offering a parting remark. Then, just as smoothly as she had arrived, she disappeared into the crowd. Lena exhaled slowly, her pulse unsteady. Quentin remained silent for a beat before finally looking down at her. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers curled slightly, as if resisting the urge to reach for her. Lena didn't ask the obvious question. Instead, she gave him an out. If he wanted to explain, he would. For a long moment, Quentin simply watched her. Then, as if making a decision, he leaned in slightly, his voice quieter than before. He didn't give her the full story, but he didn't need to. His tone told her everything. Lena searched his face, resisting the unexpected urge to reach for his hand. Instead, she nodded once. They didn't need to say anything more. Another voice cut through the moment, lighter, more familiar. Mia. Lena turned, surprised to see her friend standing near the entrance of the ballroom. Unlike the polished guests, Mia looked slightly out of place but entirely unbothered by it. Lena moved toward her instinctively, feeling a rare sense of relief. Mia wasted no time, her voice filled with restrained excitement. Lena rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help but smile. Mia's gaze flickered briefly to Quentin, then back to Lena. She lowered her voice slightly. Lena hesitated, but before she could answer, Quentin stepped closer. Mia's eyebrows lifted slightly, clearly intrigued. Quentin didn't break eye contact with Lena as he spoke. Lena's breath hitched slightly. Mia, ever perceptive, took in the exchange with a knowing look before stepping back. She grinned, her voice teasing. Lena groaned, but Mia was already disappearing into the crowd with a dramatic flourish. Quentin exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Lena turned back to him, her pulse still unsteady. The night wasn't over yet, but something had changed. And for the first time, Lena wasn't sure she wanted this to end. The air between them was different now. Something had shifted, unspoken but undeniable. Lena felt it in the way Quentin's gaze lingered on her as they moved through the ballroom. In the subtle way his fingers brushed against hers when he guided her away from the prying eyes of his family. She wasn't supposed to care. This arrangement had been clear from the start, temporary, purposeful, without emotion. But as she stood beside Quentin in a world that should have swallowed her whole, she realized something dangerous. She wanted more. The thought unsettled her. She had never been the kind of person who dreamed of fairy tale endings or grand romances. She was practical, grounded in reality. And yet, Quentin Blackwood had a way of unraveling her carefully built defenses without even trying. As they stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city, the cool night air wrapped around them. The distant hum of music and laughter from the ballroom faded, leaving only the quiet between them. Quentin exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he leaned against the railing. "You handled tonight better than I expected." Lena crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "You expected me to crumble?" His gaze flicked to hers, something unreadable in his expression. "No. But my family has a way of making people feel like they don't belong." She hesitated before replying. "They tried." A hint of something softened his features. "But you didn't let them." Lena shrugged, though her heart was unsteady. "I've spent my whole life proving people wrong." Quentin studied her, and for the first time she felt truly seen. Not as the woman playing a role in his life, but as herself. The tension between them thickened, charged with something neither of them had the courage to name. She turned her gaze to the city lights below, needing a distraction. "So, what happens now?" Quentin was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke. "I don't know," Lena frowned, turning back to face him. "That's not like you." His jaw tightened slightly. "No, it's not." She didn't miss the way his fingers curled against the railing as if restraining something. Against all reason, she took a step closer. "Quentin," before she could finish, he reached for her, his fingers brushing against her wrist. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it sent a current through her spine, a silent question hanging between them. For the first time since this arrangement had begun, there was no audience, no expectations, just them. Lena's breath hitched as he lifted her hand, his thumb tracing the inside of her palm. "If this were real," he said quietly, "if there were no arrangements, no expectations, would you still be here?" The question stole the air from her lungs. She could have lied. Could have given him the easy answer, the one that would protect them both. Instead, she whispered, "Yes." Quentin's grip tightened ever so slightly, his eyes darkening with something that made her pulse race. Before she could think, before she could second-guess herself, he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a slow, deliberate kiss, as if he had been holding himself back for far too long. Lena melted into him, into the warmth of his touch, the strength of his arms as they wrapped around her. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a shift, a breaking of everything they had tried to keep at bay. When they finally pulled apart, Quentin didn't move away. His forehead rested against hers, his breath uneven. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he murmured. Lena's fingers curled into the fabric of his jacket. "I know." But neither of them pulled away. The sound of footsteps approaching shattered the moment. Quentin straightened immediately, his expression once again composed, but Lena saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes. A familiar voice cut through the cool night air. Nathaniel. His presence was as imposing as ever, but there was something different now, a knowing glint in his eyes as he looked between them. "So it's real then," Nathaniel said, more statement than question. Quentin's jaw clenched. "That's none of your business." Nathaniel's gaze lingered on Lena for a beat too long before he finally nodded. "Mother will want to speak with you soon." Quentin didn't respond, and after a moment, Nathaniel turned and disappeared back inside. Lena exhaled slowly. "He knows," Quentin nodded, his fingers pressing lightly against her waist. "It doesn't matter." But they both knew it did. The night wasn't over yet, days passed and everything changed. Quentin no longer treated their arrangement as a performance. Their late-night conversations stretched longer, their touches lingered, and the walls between them continued to crumble. But with that change came the inevitable: his family's scrutiny intensified. Lena found herself under even more watchful eyes, whispers growing louder. She knew what they were waiting for her to fail, to prove she wasn't worthy of Quentin's world, but she wasn't going anywhere. One evening, Quentin arrived at her apartment unannounced. There was something different in his eyes, something urgent. Without a word, he took her hand, pulling her toward him. "I don't want this to end," he said. Lena's heart pounded. "Then don't let it," Quentin exhaled, frustration and longing tangled in his expression. "They'll never accept us." She lifted her chin. "Do you care?" He was silent for a moment before shaking his head. "No," Lena smiled softly. "Then we make our own rules." Quentin's lips pressed together before he cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "You make me want things I never let myself want." Lena leaned into him. "Then take them." And he did. Months later, the Blackwood family had no choice but to accept reality. Quentin and Lena were inseparable. Despite the odds, despite the whispers, they had carved out something real. At a lavish family event, Quentin did something no one expected. In front of everyone, his mother, his brother, the entire Blackwood dynasty, he took Lena's hand, got down on one knee and asked her to marry him. Lena barely had time to breathe before she blurted out, "Yes." The room erupted, but none of it mattered. Because when Quentin pulled her into his arms, pressing his lips to hers, she knew this wasn't just an arrangement anymore. This was forever. And for the first time in her life, Lena had found exactly where she belonged.